some of which I plan to cover in my marketing and funding piece this afternoon, but none of the questions that I heard and are around are new questions. Some of them need to have new answers because I've already given all mine. There are people in the room that give us lots of help, and there's lots of help in the state. And one of those helpers to organize and to understand what we're doing is Debbie Meincke. She is the executive director of the nonprofit
Alliance.
And she's housed in the Butler Institute building over there. And I became acquainted with her because of a giving day thing. I forgot
Arkansas Gives.
Arkansas Gives, and was delighted that she was willing to come and share with you what she knows about organizing for sustainability.
Thank you so much, Mary Ann. I must say that you're talking to a kiddo who kept their nose in a book their entire life, and so I have a lot of fondness for folks who are working to give other kids that opportunity. I will say that Mary Ann came to me and said, would you do something on board development, sustainability, secession, this and that, and you have 30 minutes or less. And I went, oh, that's kind of hard. But we're going to try. We're going to whiz through this and see if y'all have any questions. But I thought after the weather we've been having lately, I would give y'all a rainbow of color this morning. So it's warm and it's inviting. The Arkansas Nonprofit Alliance, just so some of you don't know who we are basically the state's nonprofit association. So we do things like provide critical information to nonprofits about legal and financial issues. We provide training. We have a great board institute that we do that helps nonprofit boards adopt best practices. We have technical support when you call me on the phone. I like to call it the nonprofit helpline. But anyway, we do research and advocacy and peer-to-peer support, as well as hosting network events like Giving Tuesday, which is coming up December 1st, which is an online giving day, somewhat similar to Arkansas Gives. So if you're a nonprofit and you're interested in strengthening the work that you do, we're the organization for you. Okay, so we're going to talk about sustainability and really how all those things Mary Ann mentioned kind of play into sustainability, and we're going to have a problem with that word, just so you know. The other thing is just to kind of make sure we're all on the same wavelength on what sustainability is. And the reason we're so concerned about it is because we want to keep doing the good work we're doing, and if we don't have some things in place, that's going to be hard to do. And I think probably most of you who have been in the world long enough with the nonprofit know that sustainability is a really big issue. And so just in terms of the definition, to provide for an institution or the like by furnishing means or funds and manage the resource base. So that's basically what sustainability is. I mean, it's a lot of other things, but in general, we're talking about making sure that we have things in place so that the organization will continue. So the other part of this is success. So when we look at sustainability, how do we know that we have had success? And one of the ways we can measure that is, have we met our mission? Because you see, a nonprofit that can sustain itself but doesn't meet its mission, in my opinion, is no good at all. So if you have a very strong nonprofit but they're not serving the kids that they need to serve, then it's worth nothing. So the most important part of this is the mission. So that's how we measure our success, is are we able to do what good for whom? In your case, kids. And kids, younger than 5 years old, specifically. So that's how you would measure your success in terms of sustainability. So, I heard y'all talking earlier about, 100% coverage or whatever. Did you have that? And so that could be one aspect of sustainability. Okay. So when you look at anything with a nonprofit, it starts with the board of directors. So are y'all independent? Yes, so y'all all have boards of directors?
Not all of us have boards at all.
Okay, so you're not, each of you don't have your own 501c3. If you have a 501c3, you need a board.
Shall we say functioning?
Okay, all right, well, that's different. Okay, I'm fixing to get the nonprofit police in here. I'm thinking, I got a bigger job today than I thought. So you all need a board of directors, a functioning board of directors. And so one way to get there is, and just because I do a lot of board training, and it always comes out that, they'll say they have a good board, but they don't fundraiser, they don't whatever. So one of the things I always say is come to something like a board institute where you're not pointing a finger at your board member and saying you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, but you're getting them in the room with other board members and executive directors, and you're hearing about best practices, so they're absorbing all that without having to be, so that's just a suggestion. But one of the ways we start in terms of boards is effective recruiting. And I'll discuss this in a little bit more detail in a minute. But then the other thing is, once you have great board members, how do they know what to do? Like I have a colleague with Board Source that says, when you've seen one board, you've seen one board. So everybody's board is different. And so you need to make sure when they come on your board that you do some orientation with them to make sure they know what your organization is like. Then the other thing is, of course, strategic planning, and then finally accountability with board self-evaluation. So we'll talk about those things real quickly. In terms of effective recruiting, one of the things I say is the board matrix is your friend. Have any of you ever used a board matrix before? It's basically a kind of a spreadsheet that lists out what it is you need on your board, who is on your board now, and how they fit into those characteristics. If you need somebody that can raise money, if you need young people, if you need, racial diversity, if you need corporate, leadership or whatever, you can look at who you've got on your board, what boxes can you check off for them, and then what's left over, who do you need. And so being very intentional about who you ask to be on your board of directors. So if you need somebody who can raise money, and you go find somebody who likes to work with programs and reading for kids, what's going to happen? You're going to have that big gap on your board, and you're not going to be as sustainable because you don't have somebody that knows fundraising, which is what you needed in the first place. Even though Mary Jane is a very nice person and really cares about literacy, if she can't fundraise, that's what you need. So then you need to know, of course, once you know what you need, where to find them. So, for example, as we decided we wanted to recruit more young people on our board. And so we went to the Young Nonprofit Professional Network and the Young Black Professional Network, and we said we need some good board members. We need some leaders that are of a different generation, shall we say. And we recruited a couple of really great board members from there. So, if you need marketing, then maybe you need to go to the local Public Relations Society meeting and start chatting up, people who are into marketing and have that expertise. I always say on a board, you must have an accountant and an attorney. Because in the old days, when I was young and just starting out, you didn't have to know that much about running a nonprofit. It was much easier. You just kind of had to have a good heart, and you could figure it out on the job. And there were no colleges that had nonprofit degrees or certification programs or anything. And it was the same with boards. You just had a group of people with a good heart who had the time. A lot of times it was women that weren't working. We all know what happened to that. And so then the issue becomes, all of the legal regulations that have come up now, and it's become much more complicated to manage a nonprofit. Your CEO needs to know a lot about those regulations, and your board needs to be sophisticated and educated enough to be able to make sure you don't find yourself in trouble. So if you don't have a functioning board, you could be putting your whole organization at risk because you're missing some legal or financial thing. I like to acknowledge the Wells. Their son, Jacob, was on my board for twice. He was one of our founding members. He was an accountant, a CPA, and was always the treasurer because, of course, you want your CPA to be the treasurer. And though Jacob was unlike any other treasurer I think we've ever had before. So, but we also, our organization was started by an attorney with the Friday firm. So we always have a Friday firm lawyer that sits on our board. So those kind of things. The other one is who should ask the person to be on the board? Should that be the CEO or the board member or somebody that knows the board member? It actually should be all three of those things. You don't want to put a board member on your board that hasn't interacted with the CEO, really. the way we do it anyway, the board and the CEO are partners. Some people have a much different relationship with their boards, but we do it in a partnership mode, so we'd to go together. But if somebody, is a friend of your board chair, knows somebody with such and such corporation, they might be the first one to open up the conversation. But eventually the board member and you are going to have to go talk to that person. And then what do you tell them when you go to recruit them? The truth. That's in all of its ugliness, the truth. When I started at this organization, the executive director had been gone for a while, and so the organization was really having to kind of rebuild a little bit. And when we recruited a board member, we told them, this is where we are, this is what we need, you need to be a part of it. And everybody knew what they were expected to do. And then we also had a financial obligation. We asked that each of our board members contribute $500 personally to the organization. We tell them that before they agree to serve on the board, because we don't want them to get halfway through there and saying, wait a minute, I don't have $500, or and because I hear a lot from boards, people that are talking about their boards, and they say they won't even donate $25 to the organization. And so I'm thinking, what? So make sure you have a list of board roles and responsibilities right up front, exactly what you expect them to do, and give them a chance to say no if they don't want to do those things. Let's see. So the other part of this is, of course, orientation. So each board has its own mission, its own culture, its own rules, way of doing things. So when a new board member comes on, you want them to know those things. If you have formal board meetings where everybody has to be recognized to speak, you want them to know that. If you have informal board meetings, you want them to know that too. One of the things we started was a mentoring program. And my vision was that it would be like a long time, like a year. Well, no, it didn't really work out that long. Basically, what I could get the board members to do was, when we had a new recruit, they would call the board member ahead of the meeting and say, welcome to the board. I'll be there. I'm going to be wearing a black shirt, and I'll be sure and introduce myself when you first get there. And then after the meeting, and maybe a few weeks after, a phone call that says, how was your meeting? Did you have any questions? Did you feel comfortable? If you have an issue, come talk to me. That was about 2 or 3 months worth of mentoring I could get for them. And so that actually was all we needed when you think about it. By the time that time period ended, the board members knew what they were supposed to be doing. So not just enough to get them on there. You got to help them figure out how to act when they're on there. So, okay. This is our life, folks, on the bottom, by the way. We talk about strategic planning. Once you get on the board and you've got great board members, how do you know where to go? Well, you may have an existing strategic plan, so you definitely need to cover that in the orientation. But when you get ready to do some strategic planning, obviously the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. But the bottom is how we usually do it in nonprofits. It's much more of a till we get where we're going. So that's kind of the nature of the beast. But it's really important for you all as an organization to know where you're going. And I don't know, how many of you have done strategic planning? That's so good. Great. How many of you followed your strategic plan? Pretty good. How many of you evaluated how well you did it? Okay. Keep going. Keep going. All right. Okay. So that leads me into accountability. On our board of directors, we know every June the board is going to do a self-evaluation. We have a former board member who takes all the evaluations, does a report for us, and gives it back to us. And it's just done every year, and the same for the CEO. I always had to ask, will you please do an evaluation of me? Would you please do it? So now they just do it as a matter of fact. In June, I'll get an evaluation, and it's just part of the culture of the organization. So we have some great examples of board self-evaluations if you're interested, where the board has to kind of go through each of the best practices and kind of assess where we are as a board on that. The information goes to a governance committee. Now, this is a new way of doing board service, and it is a trend that many are taking up. We did. A couple years ago, we had Susan Meyer from Board Source, formerly from Board Source, come in and do a board training and governance. Creating a governance committee on the board was a new trend that we, at the Arkansas Nonprofit Alliance, decided to actually implement. And what it is, a governance committee, is a committee that does the recruiting, the orientation, the evaluation of the board. Really, the governance committee is the committee that is care and feeding of the board of directors, really. It's what keeps your board strong and energetic. And one of the things that they do is we have a board education. So we have a board member 2 weeks before the board meeting who sends me a board development topic, goes out with the board material minutes, and it's the first thing we do at every meeting, because you know what happens if it's the last thing. It never happens. So we do a board development topic on financial management, on whatever the issue is. And then they do the CEO report right after that, because that was also something that used to be at the back end of the meeting and we would run out of time for it. So they decided that was important enough, they needed to have it at the top. And then they went, so they could have more time at board meetings, they created something called a consent agenda. Has anybody used those? They really help board meetings go a lot quicker and smoother. Consent agenda is where you put all those items like the minutes or the financial, the CEO report, whatever, you just, kind of everybody's seen it, no controversy about it, you just pass it out in one motion. So, you just approve the consent agenda. Now, if somebody has let's say, we're fixing to do something with our budget, and so everybody's seen it for a couple of months now, and there should be no controversy about it, so it'll probably go on the consent agenda. But if a board member says, I don't feel comfortable with that, I would like to pull the budget out of the consent agenda for more discussion, the board chair has that, can say yes or no, depending on their inclination. So the governance committee is... it actually is something that has made our board work so much more effectively, and I would really urge you to look more into using that. We've just decided to have our executive committee go defunct because there was really no purpose for it other than if there is an employee issue which may come up somewhere, they may have the executive committee meet to address that. But it's the governance committee that runs the board. They watch over the strategic plan. They do a report at every board meeting on how well we're meeting the strategic plan. We use red light, green light on it. So we have all of our objectives here, and then at the beginning of the year, it's all red. Then as the year goes on, there's a little more yellow, some green. The goal being at the end of the year, the board looks at the one pager and they see it's all green. We're good to go. If there's a whole section that's red, we never started. So it helps really quickly get the board to know where we are on different strategic objectives. And then we have time on our meeting for strategic issues. So basically, this is part of our advanced board training, but it's about having the right people doing the right work, and that is what we feel like the right work is in terms of strategic work. Not so much of, trying to figure out what the staff needs to do or programmatic stuff, or when you don't have staff, the board is much more involved in that for sure. But if they're not, then they should be involved in strategic issues. How do you get your mission funded? How do you expand into other schools or other areas? Things like that. Those are the big questions that boards need to worry about. Then, of course, the legal and financial requirements. I can't tell you how many calls I get from nonprofit CEOs primarily who call me with the horrible stories of what their board has done financially. Or something, like they bought property that they can't pay for, or whatever. It could be anything, and it's a mess. And the issue is that board members are responsible for the mess. So, if you've ever served on a board that didn't have directors and officers insurance, I wouldn't serve on it, because you are just saying that you are going to be responsible if something goes wrong, not something criminal. That's a separate thing, but just like just mismanagement or, doing something financially and the organization can't pay for it, then it's going to come back on the board members. So make sure that your board has directors and officers insurance. It's only about $500 a year. But like I said, I definitely would make sure I had that. Obviously, we're still talking about sustainability, and we're moving a little bit off from the board a little bit in terms of talking about, measuring what you do. Making sure that your funders, know what it is you're doing, making sure that you can show the success that you're having. And I've always thought literacy did a good job with measurement. So, and there are some, I know there's some fights over how to measure it, but definitely, you know, that's just like talking about the brain information. A little while ago, when I was in Florida, I was the director of the Child Abuse Prevention Network in Florida. That was way back when the brain information first came out in the early 90s. And we took that information and we used it to get a statewide home visiting network in place, to get early childhood funded. But we never could have done that without data and without measuring the success of those kinds of programs on the brain. But we were able to do it because of measurement and because of data. So resource sufficiency. If I talk to nonprofits, they have 3 things they're worried about: resources, boards, and how to get them to find resources, and technology. Those are usually the top 3. But it's always about finding enough resources to do the work. And what we've seen happen in the field is that there are many more nonprofits than there used to be. People are starting nonprofits right and left, and many of them are not sustainable, but they are drawing resources away from those that could be sustainable. So one of the things that we're working on in terms of, we have a set of best practices, the Arkansas Diamond Standards, and we have them on our website. You can look at them. We're fixing to revise them, but one of the things that funders are very interested in are trying to find out which nonprofits have been intentional about their management practices and improving their work. And so the Arkansas Diamond Standards is going to be playing a big role, I think, in the next few years in terms of helping those nonprofits that are intentional about management stand out from nonprofits who are just, you know, started in no focus as far as how they manage. And people call my office and say, I want to start a nonprofit. I say, no, I don't think you do. I say, no. I said, I ask them if they've done a market survey, market research. Nope. Have they done a business plan? Nope. Do they have any idea that there are 5 other nonprofits in the community doing exactly the same work? Nope. So, and after all that conversation, do you think I'd change anybody's mind? Nope. So, anyway, a lot of them don't last, but anyway. So, here are some factors that impact sustainability. I just said it: increasing number of nonprofits. The economic conditions, in 2008, it hit some nonprofits hard, and there'll be another something come along. So make sure you're invested or you work to mediate some of that. I was on the Gulf Coast during Hurricane Katrina, and a lot of nonprofits were completely wiped out. All their records, all their assets, everything. And they had to start over. And so some were able to do that relatively easily. They had stored their records off-site. They had resources to rebuild and this and that and the other thing. But there were a lot that weren't able to come back. Management competence or capacity is a huge factor in sustainability, obviously. The people who are rowing the boat, whether that be board or staff, CEO, obviously, if they are good at it, know what they're doing, you're going to have more likelihood of sustainability. If you've got somebody who's not, or who has other motives for the work they're doing than altruistic motives, then you may not have a sustainable organization. The other things, too, is sometimes nonprofits are inflexible. I know that's a shock, but they are inflexible in the sense that, I know when online giving first started back in the 80s or 90s, whenever the internet first came on board, everybody said, they're never going to be able to raise money on the internet. That's never going to be successful. Okay, well, I think we've seen how successful raising money on the internet and commerce in general has been. So those that got with the program early in terms of how to use the internet to give and get donations are much more ahead of the pack than those who said that's never going to work. So you need to have some, looking at trends and trying to make sure that you're poised to take advantage or to ward off trends. And then I would say the biggest reason, really, should be number one, is most folks have sustainability, which is a mile wide and an inch deep. In other words, there's tons of things they're doing, many programs, many staff, but in terms of how deep those things are rooted in finances to sustain them, they're very shallow. And so that leads to what you would think it would lead to, is an organization that topples at any at any stress. So make sure that when you're building your literacy programs that you're sinking those roots deep and not hiring staff before you know that you can pay them over the long term, or using money that's temporary to hire staff that's not going to be there next year. Those kind of things is what gets a nonprofit in trouble. Okay, this is my favorite part. This is my favorite thing to do, is when I go out in the community, is all of you are so dedicated and passionate. I'm not going to read this to you because I know y'all can read. But the work that you do, I don't think people in general understand the scope of the nonprofit sector in Arkansas and the impact that they have, and that it would not happen if it were just one person doing this here and one person doing that there. It's how you pull together many people towards that mission. And so that's what's made the nonprofit sector so valuable in communities. I think our contribution is $13.5 billion in economic impact in Arkansas. And that's a big chunk of change that we bring to the table. We employ almost 100,000 workers in Arkansas. So, and I think if you just walk out this door and look around and you started to take down the nonprofits, this building would come down. The library, the Museum of Discovery, wouldn't be a place any of us would want to live. So anyway, that's what I got.
Before we have question and answers, I want to address one thing. It's not that my board is unfunctioning. It's that we are all volunteers. We have no paid staff. We only have one strategic plan, and that's getting books to kids in the 2 counties we serve. So rather than a mile wide and an inch deep, we're an inch wide and a mile deep with the whole community, which is really part of my next one. But I wanted to explain to you that I didn't mean that I don't have people involved. It's just organized the way you are. By the same token, many of the people in this room do have boards that are organized for other things other than Imagination Library. Mm-hmm. This is where my question to you is if you have a board that's functioning and its sole purpose is not literacy, would you recommend a committee or a board or something that would specifically deal with this program? I don't know how it's done, but like I said, I've had it. So does that make sense? It makes sense,
and it would depend on, I think it would depend on the board. It would depend. I mean, one thing is it would get more focus, but it would also take away focus from those who make the decisions. So the funding. So in other words, if you don't really know what they're doing, then when it comes time to make decisions, you say, it's not that big a deal. We'll cut that out. But if you want to have an advisory board that plans which schools are going to go next and things like that, then I think that could be a real valuable activity.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Is it a definite $500 a year insurance?
No, I mean it may depend on factors in your organization. I know for us, as long as I've been there, it's been $500. And
see, that would be cost prohibitive.
Would it be?
Look at 20 kids that don't get books because you're paying insurance.
Yeah. That was. I'm glad you asked that question because can they sue a volunteer?
Yes. Well, a board member they can, and so when you say it's cost prohibitive, it depends on whether if you can lose your house or not. You know, that's what happens to board members when there's no D&O insurance. Is that, for example, if a board made, as long as your board's making good decisions and all that, great.
If the only decision we make is to pay for books and there's no paid staff, do we need insurance?
I would refer you to an attorney because I'm not an attorney.
Yes.
I say I would.
The example you gave with the board insurance, if they did like a bad financial investment. So if that was the case, and it was draining the organization, but we had the board insurance, with that, what would that like?
I would say get out.
Keep the land and the insurance kick in to bail you out, for lack of a better term?
Well, are you? What I would say is, I would say if it's a hardship to pay for D&O insurance, then I would think you need to get out and do some fundraising.
The example you gave of having the D&O insurance was if you're bought some land or something.
We have no assets, we have no land, we purchase nothing.
So essentially, the bank organization's tank. So then the insurance company.
So if you have,
How does that, I guess, besides the liability of the board to make that decision, how does that kick into the organization?
well, I mean, D&O insurance protects board members. Other things protect, like if you have volunteers delivering books to schools, they better be covered in their own for their own policies. You know, so.
We don't touch them, they're in the mail, it's a post office.
Okay.
Your question?
I'll talk to you later about
I was
it.
going to say, we have D&O insurance. It's about
Who is we?
the nonprofit I run. I run a small nonprofit that actually helps abused and neglected children. And it's pretty small. We have a small budget. But our D&O insurance runs about $800. I mean, a year, I'm sorry. But one of the things they explained to me, because it kind of gives me a heart attack every year when we write a check, is that if I, as the director for the program, accidentally made a mistake, I mean, I go through a formal audit every year, I go through all of those things, but say I made a mistake and I did something that was not ethical and not okay with funds that had been donated to our program or on one of my grants, then the board can be held liable, but it will protect those board members from something I had done with those funds. And so that's kind of how it's explained to me why it is so important, because even if I didn't mean to do it, you know, I can be held responsible and all my board members can be held responsible, so.
But I'm trying to figure out if you're not buying anything except books and you're not delivering anything, so there's no, there's no place for liability to attach, because we're small. Also, we don't have to have formal audits because we're such a small, there's a dollar break off where you have to have a whole bunch of stuff if you're a nonprofit. So we are so small, we come under that umbrella, and I probably do need to talk to my attorney in residence or to you later, but our experience in the last 10 years is that hasn't been either explained to us or the necessity of it, nor am I willing to spend $800 on insurance that or go for books. I'll probably take the liability and lose my house.
Do you have employees at all?
We don't have it many moving parts.
Yeah, that's what's so simple about the Imagination Library functioning for small communities, is that there, in general, is no paid staff, there's no property involved, we are a one-stop shop, we pay for books for kids that are delivered to the post office to the home, and we raise money to pay for it, but other than the fundraising, that's the only outside thing we do.
But isn't the whole fundraising issue probably the red flag here?
I mean, I think that I think each organization has to make its own mind up. I know that if I were running an organization, I would always have D&O insurance. Never been sued in 30 years of managing nonprofits, but I've had employee law cases, and with fundraising, I think some of the things you can get into with that is, you have to register with the Attorney General. You have to. There's all kinds of things that you have to do, and if you accept money that maybe, I would sleep better at night, but. It's up to each individual organization. It's not required by law. So.
Thank you. That was the best phrase you ever.